I returned home after my dad's death to find my mom, married to a stranger who was trying to steal my college fund. But then I discovered the shocking truth about their relationship that changed everything. Was I wrong to fight back? I just experienced the most shocking Christmas of my life, and I'm here to tell you every detail. My dad passed away just 4 months ago from complications after a car accident. He was only 45 years old. His death had been the most devastating thing to affect me these past months, or so I thought, until I returned home from college for Christmas break and discovered my mom had already moved on. Yes, that quickly. To give some context, I'm 19 years old and in my second year at a university about 6 hours away from my hometown in Michigan. When Dad died, my coping mechanism was to study every day, every second. He would have liked knowing I was working hard, although maybe not quite this hard. He was always proud of my academic success and had been saving for my education since I was little, so it was a good way to honor him. My mom, who's 42, seemed to be handling the situation okay when I left at the beginning of the fall semester. We'd talk on FaceTime and text regularly, although in recent months her calls became less frequent. The only thing she told me was that she was busy with work, and I just let it go since I was busy too. When I arrived home yesterday, the first thing that caught my attention was a car parked outside. I assumed it belonged to a friend who was helping my mom prepare for Christmas, but when I entered the house, I saw my mom in the kitchen with a man I'd never seen before. And no, he wasn't helping with Christmas preparations. Christmas isn't about that. Or at least I didn't want my Christmas to be about my mother being affectionate with a man. I would have preferred typical decorations and a tree with lights rather than seeing that at dinner. Then, to my complete surprise, I noticed they were both wearing wedding rings. My mom casually introduced the man to me as Troy, her husband. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She explained that they had gotten engaged 3 weeks ago in a private ceremony after dating for just 2 months. 2 months after my dad's death, she found someone new, and now she was already married again. Just 2 months later, the man, Troy, was apparently a business consultant she met at work. Not only had they gotten married without telling me, but he had already moved into our house. I asked her why she hadn't told me anything about this. Far from giving me a coherent explanation, if there was one, my mom immediately became defensive, saying she was moving forward and that she deserved to be happy. I don't say she doesn't, but why didn't she tell me? She said she didn't want to be tied to an ugly past and that she wanted to focus on her new beginning. I told her it felt like she was erasing my dad from her life, and she had the audacity to say I was being selfish for not supporting her new marriage. It was hard to support it for several reasons, but mainly because I had just found out about it, and only by chance. The argument escalated. My mom tried to justify everything by telling me she needed to move on, but deep down, I knew she had moved suspiciously quickly to replace Dad. I told her she couldn't hide something like this from me and expect me to be happy about it. That's when she stormed off and slammed her bedroom door in my face. Troy, her new husband, tried to intervene, telling me that everyone deals with grief in their own way, and that I should try to be more understanding. He was dealing with grief, but it was my mother's grief he was taking advantage of. There was no way I could stay in that house for Christmas, not with them. I grabbed my things, got in my car, and drove straight to my grandparents' house. My dad's parents lived just 20 minutes away, and I knew they could accommodate one more person for Christmas. When I arrived at their house and told them everything that had just happened, they were just as confused as I was. No, none of them had any idea that my mom had secretly married this Troy guy. My grandmother immediately tried to call my mom to get answers. I was hoping this was some kind of misunderstanding or that there was a reasonable explanation for why no one had been informed, but my mom didn't answer a single time. Every call went straight to voicemail. My grandfather sat thinking until he finally spoke about my trust fund that my dad had left for my college expenses. My father had created one when he started saving, long before the accident and before I went to college. Thanks to that, I was still studying instead of having to drop everything and look for a job to cover expenses. My grandparents were the trustees of this fund, which meant they were responsible for managing it and ensuring it was used exactly as my dad had planned, for my education. There was also life insurance money, which was separate from the trust and was given directly to my mom after my dad's death. What I didn't know at that moment was that there had been some issues with the trust. My grandparents had been trying to get my mom to sign some routine documents related to it for several weeks, But she had been avoiding it. She kept making excuse after excuse, saying she was too busy, that she hadn't had time to review the documents, or that she would eventually do it. They thought she was just dealing with grief, since the death of your spouse isn't something easy to handle, and that she would finally do it when she could. After all, we were all still mourning my dad. But now that didn't seem to be the explanation. My mother wasn't grieving, she was enjoying her new life and marrying Troy. So my grandfather called his lawyer to make sure everything with my trust was safe. My grandfather kept me updated while he was on the phone with the lawyer, telling me what was being said on the other end of the line. Apparently, my mom and her new husband Troy had been trying to get access to the money. They had exchanged emails between my mom's lawyer and the legal team managing the trust, and these weren't just casual inquiries. My mom's lawyer had been trying to argue that because she had remarried, the trust fund money should now be considered part of the marital assets. They wanted access to the funds not just for my education, but to use them as they saw fit. She wanted to continue my father's legacy by determining how my money was spent. This morning, my grandparents gave me an early Christmas gift, copies of the documents that legally secured my college fund, protected from my mom and Troy. They made sure everything was ironclad so there was no way my mom could touch it, no matter what she or her new husband tried to do. They also told me that Troy had tried to directly contact my grandparents' lawyer to try to negotiate something regarding the trust, but their lawyer immediately stopped him. When my mom found out that I knew about the trust situation, she went crazy. Now she does want to talk to us, leaving voicemails and texts saying I shouldn't have involved my father's family. Troy's solution has been to mediate. He says we should resolve this as a family. He sounds like he's known me all my life when I haven't even given him my number, and my mother probably gave it to him to try something different. I can't stop thinking about how much my dad would hate all of this, knowing that his wife was probably with another man, and his death only made things easier for them. Update 1. My dad always valued family, loyalty, and doing the right thing, values that my mom doesn't represent at all. A few days have passed since I first shared what happened, and things have already occurred. I don't know why, but the news of what happened started circulating among family and friends. I started hearing about it from family friends, and even from people I hadn't spoken to in years. I've only talked to a few people, but it still spreads quickly. Some contacted me just to say I could count on them, but others had information. It turns out that Troy and my mom didn't meet a few months after my dad's death, as I suspected. They had been working together on projects for at least 6 months before my dad passed away. And that's just what I know. It could be more. This only confirms to me that something more was going on even before my dad's accident. The most disturbing thing is that some people who worked with my mom, yes, even they got the information, said the two would regularly have lunch together and were even seen attending work events side by side. It's not unusual for colleagues to spend time together, but the way they described it made it seem like something more intimate. Okay, it doesn't confirm it 100%, but come on. We can freely say it's 99% likely that it began while my dad was still alive. It could be that my mom was having an emotional relationship, but a physical one is very likely. Besides that, I found out that my mom had started making discreet changes to her social media right after the wedding. She adjusted her privacy settings and removed many of my dad's friends and extended family members from her friends list. Several family friends told me they tried to contact her at that time to offer their condolences and support, only to find they had been blocked. If it sounds suspicious, it's because it is. It wasn't just me she was hiding the marriage from. It was everyone who could potentially confront her about what she was doing. She didn't want anyone to know she had moved on so quickly. Then there's the matter of Troy. There's more specifically about him that just adds more fuel to this problem. My dad's best friend, who works in a different department at the same company as my mom, reached out to me. He told me that Troy was actually married when he began working with my mom. In fact, his divorce wasn't finalized until 6 weeks before my dad's accident. I don't think I need to do the math for you. I can't help but wonder if this is why my mom never seemed to want to talk much about my dad after he passed away. She said she wanted to move on, but maybe it was because she had already started moving on long before any of us knew. That's why my 99% sounds even conservative. My grandparents are as shocked and disgusted as I am, and as many of you are. I'm still at their house, and we're still in contact with their lawyer to make sure everything is still okay and that they haven't tried anything. It's well structured, so it's not like my mother could do something funny. She would need a move similar to pulling a rabbit out of a hat, but in terms of lawyers. The lawyer says my dad was incredibly meticulous in setting up the trust, possibly because he had concerns about my mom's ability to make decisions, especially in the financial realm. Well, that has turned out better than expected, but in other areas. The trust is set up in such a way that the money can only be used for educational expenses and basic living costs until I turn 25. My grandparents are the trustees, which means they have full control over the funds until I'm old enough to handle them on my own. This means my mom and Troy have no legal right to the money, no matter what they try. It terrifies me to think about what could have happened if my mom had had control of my college money after marrying Troy. My grandparents' lawyer has assured us that there's no way my mom or Troy can access the trust fund, but they've already made several attempts. Troy even had the audacity to contact my grandparents' lawyer directly to discuss the matter. You can tell they're desperate. Meanwhile, my mom fluctuates between a bad mother and a good mother. One minute she tells me I'm throwing a tantrum over nothing, and the next she begs me to come home. If it sounds like a trap, it's because it is. They've surely dug a hole in the front yard and put leaves on top for me to fall in when I pass by. That's what I think snakes like them would do. I'll spend this Christmas and New Year with my grandparents, which feels right because they'll be my first holidays without my father. They've also made it clear that I can stay as long as I need, although sooner or later I'll have to go back to college. Update 2. A couple of days ago, my grandparents received a formal letter from my mom's lawyer. In the letter, they were accused of alienating me from her and manipulating me regarding my inheritance and the trust fund my dad created. The lawyer claimed that my mom, as my surviving parent, should have been named as the trustee of my college fund and demanded access to all documents related to the trust. The whole situation is ridiculous because my dad's decision to name my grandparents as trustees was completely intentional, and the trust is unbreakable. But apparently, my mom is now willing to take this to court. She really believes she can force my grandparents to give her control of my trust fund by claiming they're manipulating me. The absurdity of the situation would almost be funny, except for the immense stress it's causing for all of us. What my mom didn't expect, however, was for this to completely backfire on her. When my grandparents' lawyer received the letter, he responded with solid evidence. He presented evidence that my mom had tried to withdraw money from one of my dad's personal accounts just days after his death, before the probate process even began. For those who don't know, this is illegal, as all of my dad's assets had to go through probate first. I had no idea about any of this, but apparently, my mom was trying to access money she wasn't legally entitled to, and that alone could get her into serious trouble. But it doesn't end there. The lawyer also showed us a letter that my dad had left with the trust documents. I had no idea this letter existed. In it, my dad explained exactly why he had chosen his parents as trustees instead of my mom. The truth is that there were serious problems with money management during my parents' marriage, things I never knew about as a child. According to the letter, my mom had a history of financial mismanagement. He didn't go into too many details, but it was clear that my dad didn't trust her to handle large sums of money responsibly. My grandparents have handled all of this in the most professional way possible, but the more I learn about what has been happening behind the scenes, the angrier I feel. In the end, my mother was hiding many things, and every day I learn new things about her, each worse than the other. I had no idea there were already problems with her judgment regarding finances before. I thought this change only happened after my dad's death, but it seems she was already a questionable harpy before. And speaking of people with questionable intentions, Troy seems increasingly sleazy. At first, I thought this was his second marriage, but now I've discovered it's actually his third. One of his ex-wives found me on social media after finding out about the whole situation through a relative. She told me that Troy has a pattern of targeting financially vulnerable women, especially those who have recently gone through major life changes like a divorce or the death of a spouse. Apparently, both previous marriages ended in financial disputes, where Troy tried to extract as much money as possible during the divorce settlements. The ex-wife warned me that Troy was incredibly manipulative and charming at first, but once he secured a certain level of control, usually financial, his true nature would come out. She told me he had a way of isolating his wives from their families and making them financially dependent on him, which sounds similar to what's happening with my mom right now. Although Troy seems like a sinister man, this doesn't exonerate my mother from what she's doing. Her infidelity doesn't seem to be the product of manipulation. Fortunately, my university has been incredibly supportive throughout all of this. After explaining the situation to the financial aid office, they helped me update all my documents to reflect that I now live full-time with my grandparents. This is in case my mother tried something at my university too. They also assured me that my scholarships and grants are secure and marked my account to prevent any interference from my mom. At least my future is protected, literally, since it's shielded from my mother and her husband. When I was traveling to spend Christmas with my mother, the idea of having legal battles wasn't what I thought I'd have to face at 19, but here we are. Update 3. My mom has contacted me to give me some kind of explanation for what she considers has been happening, a long email that I'm going to summarize here. She claimed that her relationship with Troy had started as a simple friendship between two people supporting each other through difficult times, his divorce and my dad's death. She painted their relationship as a beautiful story of two people finding light in the darkness, the typical love story in the face of adversity. It was so far from reality that I barely recognized the person who wrote those words. She said her quick marriage was a way of embracing life after tragedy. If it seemed like she was romanticizing and hiding her infidelity, it's because her email sounded exactly like that. However, there was at least one admission on her part. She said that she and Troy had indeed been planning to use part of my trust fund as the down payment for a house they were thinking of buying together. Her approach was that it was a logical, family-oriented decision, saying it would have been an investment in my future because I would eventually inherit it. Sure, if Troy didn't take it first. Then she started getting angry because my grandparents and I had blocked her access to that money, ruining something that, according to her, would benefit me in the long run. Thanks, Mom, but I prefer to study and secure my future in another way, far from your and Troy's clutches. As if that wasn't enough, things have gotten even worse in terms of harassment. My mom and Troy have been showing up at my grandparents' house unannounced, repeatedly trying to contact them. At first, they would just knock on the door, but now they've started staying outside even after being told to leave. It's gotten to the point where my grandparents' lawyer had to file a restraining order against both of them. Yesterday, the police had to be called when Troy refused to leave my grandparents' property. He's showing more and more signs of being exactly the kind of person his ex-wife warned me about, a manipulator with no limits when it comes to getting what he wants. The only problem is that he's transforming faster now before securing the money. However, not everything is bad in my update. There is a ray of hope. The support I've received from my dad's side of the family has been incredible. They've stepped up for me in ways I never expected. Not only my grandparents, who have already done so much, have offered me to live with them permanently whenever I'm not at university. They've made it clear that their house is now my home and that I'll never have to worry about going back to my mom's house. In fact, my aunt, my dad's sister, will fly from Colorado next week to help me pack the rest of my belongings from my mom's house. Having so many people supporting you when on the other side, you have leeches trying to suck the last drop of blood from you feels good. I've also decided to start seeing a therapist. Losing my dad was hard enough, but with all this, it's necessary. I've also lost my mom, or at least the one I knew. My grandparents helped me find a counselor who specializes in both grief and family conflicts. These are steps in the right direction, where it's necessary to go. Another positive step has been connecting with a financial advisor thanks to my grandparents. They want to make sure I fully understand the trust fund and how to manage it responsibly. Until recently, I only knew about its existence and little else. I was only concerned with knowing that my university was paid for. My advice? Worry about your personal finances even when you think they're boring. For those who have asked about the legal aspect, my grandparents' lawyer remains confident that my mom doesn't have a case regarding the trust fund. There's too much evidence to prove that my mother is being unreasonable here, and everything is legally solid. We're now focusing on documenting all of my mom and Troy's harassment attempts to prevent future legal challenges. My grandparents' lawyer is aware of everything, and I trust that we're in good hands moving forward. Thank you all for your support. I'll update if anything important changes. Update 4. I've already taken all my things out of my mother's house, including some mementos of my father, which my mother fortunately didn't throw in the trash. It was uncomfortable going there with my mother in the house, as she refused to leave and tried to convince me to stay, but I was accompanied by my aunt, uncle, and even my cousin, so I felt safe, like I had private security. I think it's time to address a comment that has been repeated a lot. the one about my dad's accident, and the possibility that my mother and Troy were involved. My father crashed into an oncoming car, and both he and the other driver died. It's not like my mother cut his brakes like in the movies or paid someone to hurt him. That's the introduction. And now comes the most important part: my mother and Troy. The lawsuit they tried to file fell apart shortly after the last update. Although my mother was fined $2,000 for trying to access my father's money before the probate was completed, they still haven't been able to get their sticky, greasy hands on my money, and that's how it will stay. But there's more. Troy filed for divorce from my mother and got it in about 4 months. My mother was so clever, by the way, I'm being ironic, that she didn't sign any prenuptial agreement. So Troy left with the life insurance money that had become a marital asset, while she kept the house as part of the divorce settlement. But there's more. My mother put the house up for sale because she had taken out a mortgage on it and now can't pay it. She put the house in her name to give Troy money for some kind of business that failed, like so many others. Now she's selling it to be able to pay that mortgage, which is much more than she can afford without Troy's salary in the equation. She asked my maternal grandparents for money, but they said no. She also tried to ask me for money from the trust fund, but I doubt even she expected a yes. The family house wasn't a big deal. That's why they wanted to buy a bigger one with my trust fund for the down payment. But there's more. It seemed like Troy was getting something out of all this until one of his ex-wives showed up and sued him for some of the nonsense he tried with her. They're still in court for that. My mother also tried to sue him for the failed business, but it was a legitimate business that simply failed like many others. You can't sue someone when you give them money without signing any contract. There are bills and receipts that specifically indicate where the money went in the business, and that business operated, at least for a while. But there's more. Well, I think that's actually all. The only thing I have to tell you is that I'll soon spend a week at my grandparents' house for vacation. I don't know if that counts as there's more. There might be something else, and I'll find out what happens with Troy and his lawsuit. At this rate, it seems he spends more time in front of a judge than sleeping in his own house. Update 5. I've talked to Troy's ex-wife, with whom I'm now kind of friends. She has allowed me to tell you about the lawsuit, but doesn't want me to talk about exact figures. I can only say it's quite substantial. I don't know how much my mother received from my father's life insurance, but it must have been a good amount. That's what Troy lost when his ex sued him, maybe even more, although that's just speculation. I don't know how much one might get from life insurance. $200,000 or $300,000 must be close to the value of the house for them to have divided things equally, although there were some savings involved. So I'm not that up to date on my mother's finances at the moment. That's all I had to tell you.